Hi, my name is Varmar, and in this video I'm going to show you how to enable and use the Unreal Engine plugin that I created, which is called Ray Tracing Controls, that's going to be available in the marketplace. Now, if you got this plugin, all you need to do is go into the plugins and search for Ray Tracing Control, and this is going to be the plugin that you need to enable. Now, if you do that, restart your engine, and then you can start to control the ray tracing. Now, obviously, you heard about the execute console commands, where you can use the certain commands to control the ray tracing itself, like r.RayTracing.1 or whatever. These commands are going to set it for the appropriate session in runtime. That's true, yes, but these are not persistent changes, meaning that if your user, for example, wants to change this and wants to make it a default value for the next restart, it's not going to be enabled. Not to mention that you are not going to be able to set the config values, because the config values themselves in the default Engine.ini are heavily protected, and these particular values that control the hardware ray tracing are heavily protected by Unreal Engine. So basically you are not really able to set the config. I tried many different ways to do so, but how this whole plugin works is going to do the saving into the saved config folder, and depending if you are in an editor mode or you have a packaged project, it's going to either have a Windows editor folder, or it's either going to have just a simple Windows folder. Now inside you're going to have these certain values, and you're going to have an Engine.ini. Now in the Engine.ini, this is where it's going to save the values, specifically going to save it right here in the bottom of the page. Okay, so this is how it's going to save the values themselves. Now, what blueprint nodes are exposed is basically we have a few nodes that you can use. Now, if you type in here that ray tracing, then you are going to see these kind of nodes here. So you have the set ray tracing enabled, obviously, which is going to either enable or disable the ray tracing itself, right? And by the way, this is also going to enable or disable skin cache, because skin cache comes by default, meaning if you go to your project settings and you type hardware ray tracing, then basically if you enable hardware support for hardware ray tracing, it's going to ask you to enable skin cache. So I'm enabling skin cache also along with it. If you want to, just to be sure, you could theoretically enable these values, restart your editor, then disable these values, and from there let the nodes control it. But it's already included the skin cache, so it should not be a problem, even if you don't touch these settings whatsoever yourself. Now, my nodes are controlling these values. It's controlling the overall support for hardware ray tracing. It's controlling the use hardware ray tracing when available for Lumen. It's also controlling the ray trace shadows, and also controlling the path tracing. So all these values are going to be exposed. So if you type set ray tracing, so the next node, you have the set path tracing enabled, right? And let me just, yeah, in the ray tracing section, we have the set ray tracing enabled. There's the genuine enable disable one. You have the set path tracing enabled. You also have a shadows enabled, and now this one is the ray tracing shadows, and you also have the last one is the set Lumen.HardwareRayTracing enabled, right? So this is the last node that is exposed. These are the 4 nodes that I created. Now, the set ray tracing group ID is not my node. This is a default node that's coming with Unreal Engine, right? So it doesn't belong, but the rest of the ray tracing nodes, these ones, are my nodes. Okay, so except the group ID, now you have this one, this one, this one, and this one. So basically this enables or disables hardware ray tracing whatsoever. This controls the path tracing, this controls the ray tracing shadows, and then this is controlling the hardware ray tracing enable when supported node. Okay, so all you need to do, I'm not going to show you how you create your own menu, is up to you, but these are the nodes that you can use to persistently edit these values. So if let's say we connect for each of these, right? just like this. And then just to confirm, let me show you that in my project settings, I do not have support hardware ray tracing enabled, okay? And none of these values are enabled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable each of these as such, like this. I'm going to go inside my game, okay? I'm gonna press my F key. That basically enables all of these settings. And now all I need to do is I need to restart the engine, obviously, because you still need to restart the engine to take place and to show it into the project settings. Now, if you have, let's say, a in-game menu where you do this, prompt your user to actually restart the engine, so then each of these values could be a persistent change accordingly. Now, if we go back to the project setting and we type hardware ray tracing, now we can see that each of these values are now enabled by itself, even though that in our config folder, so we go to config, you're still going to have the ray tracing default values where you set it. So by default, it still could be false, everything could be off, but still inside our Windows editor specific Engine.ini, we did set it, however. So let's go back here into the Engine.ini in the config, saved config Windows editor, or again, if it's a package build, then it's going to be saved config Windows folder. And inside the Engine.ini, if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see that r.RayTracing true, r.Lumen.HardwareRayTracing true, r.RayTracing.Shadows true, and PathTracing is true. So these values are going to be applied into your configs whenever the game restarts, right? So this is going to be persistent changes. So with these nodes, you are free to do persistent ray tracing related changes in-game from an in-game menu that's going to persist throughout the next restarts of the engine. Now I also exposed some get nodes so you can easily check in your project if the actual setting is set correctly or not. These nodes are going to respond to you with a true or false based on the current settings. So the is ray tracing enabled going to correspond to the overall set ray tracing enable. The is ray tracing shadows enabled obviously going to react to the ray tracing shadows enabled, and the path tracing for the path tracing, and the Lumen hardware ray tracing for the Lumen hardware ray tracing. So as you can see, these are in pairs, meaning that once you enable something like this one, you can check later on if it's actually enabled or not. Now, like I said earlier, if you enable anything, you need to restart your engine. So if you set these values dynamically, then you need to restart your engine so it corresponds and it shows you correctly the actual up-to-date state of the game. And from there, you can actually track with these ones if they are legit or not. Now, how we can test it? Inside my project, I did set everything to be completely on, right? So if I go to hardware ray, as you can see, everything is on. So the Lumen, the overall, the ray trace shadows, and the path tracing. So how we can test it? I have some print string nodes here, and they are just going to get the Boolean values for these nodes, and they're going to turn it into a print string. So we're going to set it. Let's say the first one going to be the is ray tracing enabled, and then the second one is going to be path tracing. Let's give it a nice different color. And then the last one is going to be the ray tracing shadows. Let's set it to yellow. And then if we are going inside the game, right, then what's going to happen is that if I press F, it's going to be true. If I press G, going to be true. If I press H, going to be true. Now, to show you that it's not just blindly responding to true, what we're going to actually do now is that I am going to take this node and I'm going to accept the set ray tracing enabled. I'm going to turn off a few things, right? So I'm going to turn set ray tracing shadows enabled. I'm going to turn the path tracing. Both of these I'm going to turn off. I'm going to leave this one, however, for now. So let's just disable these particular values, okay? And then I'm going to be like this. And that means when I'm inside the game and I press the F key, then I'm going to basically set these values to be off. Let's go out from the menu. I pressed it, of course. If I go here, of course, they're not gonna be visible because you need a restart. So right now everything is, as you can see, fully turned on. But if I restart my game, right, let's just restart the game. Let me reopen my game. If I restart the game, you're going to see that once it's up and running, there we go. If we go to the hardware ray tracing again, now you can see that the ray tracing shadows and path tracing are both off. So how we can now test these get nodes basically is the path tracing and the ray tracing shadows both going to be off. Meanwhile, the overall set ray tracing enabled, that is indeed going to be true. So if we go back now and we go into the game, first going to be true, but the second going to be false, and the last one is going to be false, because we did change these values from true to false. And that's how you control these things. Whenever you set something and then restart the engine, from there in real time you can get if it's enabled or not. So it's a nice addition, the get nodes, and is now completely, you have a set and a get for each of these things, meaning that for every single engine rendering hardware ray tracing, here the support hardware ray tracing, the shadows, the path tracing, and the Lumen hardware ray tracing, each of these have now a get and a set node available. So if I do ray tracing, now you can see that our ray tracing kind of category is a really extended one with 8 different nodes included, 4 for the set node and 4 for the ease node. Now, of course, like I said earlier, the set ray tracing group ID and get ray tracing group ID is not mine, so these particular ones are not created by me. This is default by Unreal Engine, but the ease nodes here and the set nodes here are all mine. So that's it basically. You can use these kind of nodes to check real time if the hardware ray tracing settings are enabled. Thank you very much for watching this, and I hope you enjoy the plugin.